The morning light slipped through the wide windows of the Carter penthouse, flooding the white marble kitchen in an indifferent glow. From the 32nd floor, Seattle looked almost peaceful, rain brushing over the skyline, the ferries gliding silently across Elliott Bay. To the outside world, this view was the very symbol of success. But for Olivia Carter, it had become a reminder of everything that no longer felt alive. She stood by the counter, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. The smell of roasted beans and rain mixed in the air, but it barely reached her senses. Daniel sat across from her, scrolling through his phone, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression distant in a way that made her chest tighten. He used to look at her, really look at her in the mornings. There used to be warmth in his eyes, quiet laughter over burnt toast, his voice teasing her about the way she'd steal his shirt to wear as a robe. Now, there was only the rhythmic sound of his thumb sliding over the screen and the ticking clock above the fridge. "You're leaving early again?" Olivia asked, her voice low, careful not to sound like accusation. Daniel didn't look up. "Yeah, the investors from Tokyo are landing this afternoon. I have to prep the numbers before they arrive." There was a pause, a small, fragile silence that used to be filled with comfort but now felt unbearable. "I thought maybe we could have dinner together tonight," she continued, trying to sound casual. "It's been a while." He finally looked at her, eyes tired but polite, as if he were addressing a colleague rather than his wife. "I'll try, but don't wait up, okay?" And that was it. No kiss goodbye, no soft touch on her shoulder. Just the sound of the door clicking shut, leaving her alone in a penthouse that was too quiet, too clean, too large for one heart to echo in. For years, Olivia had built her life around him. Once, she had been a fierce journalist, a voice that questioned, challenged, exposed. She had written about truth, about love, about the fragility of trust. But after marrying Daniel, the brilliant CEO everyone admired, she had let that voice fall silent. At first, it felt like safety. He was the man who steadied her storms. But safety, she realized now, could also be another form of captivity. The afternoon stretched endlessly. She wandered through the apartment, the sound of rain whispering against the glass walls. Their wedding photos lined the hallway, Daniel in his tuxedo, eyes full of quiet pride. Olivia laughing under a canopy of white roses, her hand clutching his. The images felt like memories from another lifetime. She stopped in front of the one taken on their honeymoon in Santorini, the sea behind them impossibly blue. He had been playful then, spontaneous, pulling her close for photos and whispering, "Let's never turn into those people who forget to look at each other." She smiled bitterly now, tracing the frame with her fingers. By evening, the apartment felt colder. Daniel texted her once, "Running late. Don't wait up." No apology, no explanation. Olivia poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Somewhere out there, people were laughing, falling in love, making mistakes, forgiving each other. Life was happening everywhere but here. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, still beautiful, maybe even elegant, but lonely in a way she had never been before. She wondered when that loneliness began. Perhaps it was the first time Daniel skipped their anniversary dinner for a meeting, or the night she woke up to find him working in the study at 3 a.m., whispering into his phone. Or maybe it began the day she stopped asking where he was, because she was afraid of the answer. Later, she wandered into his office. It was immaculate, every paper aligned, every pen capped, every trace of life erased. On his desk sat a framed photo of them at a charity gala. To anyone else, it was a picture of perfection. To Olivia, it was a lie. She opened one of his drawers, not looking for anything specific, just needing to feel closer to him somehow. There were business cards, receipts, a folded note she didn't recognize. She hesitated before opening it. It was just a reminder written in Daniel's neat handwriting. Appointment, Dr. R. Miller, Friday 2 p.m. Her heart skipped. Daniel hated doctors. He hadn't mentioned any appointment. For a moment, she felt the sting of suspicion, the kind she had once written about in her articles. How infidelity begins with secrets too small to notice until they become walls too thick to break. She closed the drawer, trying to steady her breath. Maybe it was nothing. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it would not stop growing. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She lay on Daniel's side of the bed, the sheets cool and untouched. She remembered the way he used to hold her in the dark, his breath against her neck, the steady rhythm that used to make her feel safe. She thought of how love could fade so quietly that one morning you'd wake up and not even remember the moment it slipped away. When dawn came, she stood by the window again. The city looked the same, gray, elegant, distant. Somewhere below, people hurried through the rain with umbrellas, each carrying their own quiet story of survival. She envied them for their purpose, their chaos, their noise. Olivia picked up her phone and opened Daniel's social media profile. There he was, smiling beside board members, shaking hands with politicians, always the image of success. Hundreds of likes, comments calling them Seattle's power couple. She almost laughed. The irony was too sharp. Behind closed doors, they were strangers sleeping in the same bed. She closed the app and opened her notes instead. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard before she began to type. They say every marriage has its secrets. Ours was built on silence. It wasn't for anyone else to read, not yet, but the words poured out like a confession she didn't know she'd been holding. Somewhere deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a story she could no longer hide behind the glass walls of their perfect life. She didn't know it yet, but that first line would one day become the opening paragraph of the article that changed everything. The days began to blend together, one identical to the next rain against the windows, the faint hum of the city below, and the echo of footsteps that never returned before midnight. Seattle had entered its grayest season, the kind where sunlight seemed like a rumor, and everything smelled faintly of wet asphalt and forgotten promises. For Olivia Carter, that grayness had seeped into her bones. Daniel's absences had become routine. At first, she told herself it was temporary, a new deal, an expansion, another investor. He had always been ambitious. It was one of the things she'd loved about him when they met. But lately, ambition felt like an excuse. She'd hear his key turn in the lock close to 1 a.m. The sound used to bring comfort. Now it woke her like a cold whisper. He would move quietly through the dark, careful not to disturb her, as though her sleeping presence was something fragile and distant. She'd lie still, pretending to sleep, feeling the mattress dip slightly when he climbed in beside her. There was no touch, no warmth. Sometimes he didn't even lie down. He'd go to the guest room, claiming he didn't want to wake her with his restlessness. It was on one of those sleepless nights that she began to watch him differently, not as a wife in love, but as an observer, as a journalist piecing together a story. The smallest things began to stand out. A faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers on his shirt, the way he flinched when she tried to reach for his hand, the locked notifications on his phone. She started to keep mental notes, quiet suspicions she didn't dare to voice out loud. During the day, the world continued to applaud them. On social media, they were the embodiment of elegance, the Carters, Seattle's golden couple. Photos of charity galas, award dinners, and sunlit vacations filled their feeds. Olivia could still remember those events, the practiced smiles, the way Daniel's hand rested on her back in front of the cameras, the polite laughter that hid an aching silence. She wondered if anyone could sense how empty it all was, or if the illusion was too perfect to crack. One afternoon, Olivia met her friend Claire for coffee. Claire worked in media too, and though she rarely spoke about her own relationships, she had a way of seeing through people's facades. "You look tired," Claire said, stirring her cappuccino. "Everything okay with Daniel?" Olivia forced a smile. "We're fine. Just busy. You know how it is." Claire raised an eyebrow. "You used to write about people who said that, remember? The ones who were falling apart but didn't want to admit it." The words stung because they were true. Olivia had written about infidelity, emotional detachment, the slow erosion of trust. She had described it so vividly once, the way a home could feel like a museum of former love. Now she was living it, one quiet fracture at a time. That night, Daniel didn't come home at all. His text arrived at 11:37 p.m., still in meetings. "Stay up if you want, but don't wait for me." She stared at the message until the screen dimmed. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was their tone, formal, sterile, like a message sent between coworkers. She typed a reply, "Everything okay?" but deleted it before hitting send. Pride, exhaustion, maybe both stopped her. The next morning, she found him asleep on the couch, still in his suit. His tie was loose, his phone face down beside him. For a moment, she just looked at him. Even in sleep, there was tension in his features, a kind of pain she couldn't name. When he stirred, she gently touched his arm. "Daniel," she whispered, "you didn't come home last night." He blinked awake, disoriented, then sighed. "I didn't want to wake you. It was late." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her then, and something flickered in his eyes, not guilt, not anger, but fatigue, a deep weariness she'd never seen before. "Liv, please. Not this morning. I just need coffee." And with that, he got up and walked away, leaving her standing there, the distance between them widening like a shadow stretching across the floor. Later, she found herself sitting at her desk, scrolling through their old photos again. Her cursor hovered over one image, Daniel holding her waist at an awards dinner, his smile perfect, his eyes unreadable. She compared it to another photo taken years earlier on a road trip to Oregon. In that one, he was laughing, wind in his hair, freckles from the sun across his cheeks. It was real, unguarded. She realized she hadn't seen that version of him in years. Her instincts, the same ones that once exposed lies for a living, told her something was wrong, something deeper than work, something hidden. But her mind, heavy with fear, whispered the one word she didn't want to believe: affair. That night she went to his office again. The air smelled faintly of cedar and cologne. She sat in his chair, staring at the city lights, her reflection merging with the skyline. On his desk lay a pile of receipts, restaurants, hotels, late-night expenses that didn't match his usual schedule. She picked one up, the Sterling Room. 10:42 p.m., a high-end restaurant known for its dim lighting and expensive privacy. Her pulse quickened. She tried to breathe evenly, telling herself there could be an explanation. Business dinners, meetings. But the ache in her chest said otherwise. When Daniel came home past midnight, she was still awake, sitting on the couch. "Were you at the Sterling Room?" she asked quietly. He froze for just a second, barely noticeable, but enough. Then he nodded. "Client dinner." "With who?" He hesitated. "You wouldn't know them." The answer landed like a cold slap. It wasn't what he said, it was the way he said it, the practiced calm of a man who had learned how to hide behind half-truths. She wanted to scream, to demand names, to accuse him outright. But something inside her pride, maybe fear, kept her still. You don't talk to me anymore, Daniel. You come home late, you don't even touch me. If something's wrong, just tell me. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaled sharply. I'm tired, Olivia. I don't have the energy to defend myself every night. I'm not asking you to defend yourself, she said, voice trembling. I'm asking you to see me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain pressed harder against the windows, filling the silence that had grown too wide to cross. Finally, Daniel turned away. Good night, he said softly, walking down the hall to the guest room. Olivia sat there long after he disappeared, her eyes fixed on the reflection of their home pristine, beautiful, lifeless. On social media, they were still perfect. She imagined the world looking at their smiling photos and thinking, they have everything. But behind the glass walls of that apartment, everything was breaking, not with noise or violence, but with silence the kind that drowns slowly, leaving no one to notice until it's too late. The storm that had been building inside Olivia finally broke on a gray Sunday afternoon. Seattle's skyline was swallowed by mist, and rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows like tears the sky refused to hold back. Daniel had been gone all weekend, a conference in Portland, he'd said, and the silence of the penthouse was suffocating. She sat at her desk in the corner of their living room, the cursor blinking on an empty document. It had been months since she'd written anything more than a grocery list or a message that began with, "We need to talk," and ended with nothing at all. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if waiting for permission from a part of herself that had gone dormant. But when she finally started to type, the words came like rain bursting through a broken roof. I'm trapped in a beautiful marriage. The sentence appeared on the screen, stark and brutal. It was the truth, or at least her version of it. Her story unfolded in paragraphs heavy with confession. She wrote about the loneliness that came wrapped in silk sheets, about dinners eaten alone while pretending to live a dream others envied. She described the way her husband's eyes passed through her, the way affection had been replaced by politeness, how silence had become their mother tongue. Every line cut closer to the bone. The words weren't polished or clever. They were raw, pulsing, bleeding. They see us and think we are perfect, but perfection is the cruelest disguise. It traps you inside a life so beautiful that no one believes you when you say it's killing you. Hours passed without her noticing. The rain grew heavier, the daylight dimmed, and her coffee turned cold beside the keyboard. When she finally stopped, she felt hollow, emptied of something poisonous. She reread the essay, her heart pounding with a strange mixture of shame and relief. Olivia knew she couldn't publish it under her real name. Daniel's company depended on their image, the philanthropic, refined couple who embodied success. She wasn't ready to destroy him publicly, or maybe she wasn't ready to face what would happen if she did. So she used an old account from her journalism days, one that hadn't been active for years, and submitted the essay anonymously to the Urban Voice, a popular online publication that often featured personal stories. She clicked send before she could change her mind. That night, she dreamed of drowning the cold pull of water closing over her, her lungs burning for air. When she woke, the world was still gray, still raining, and Daniel was still gone. By noon, her phone began buzzing. A message from Claire. Liv, is this you? Followed by a link. She opened it. Her words were there, staring back at her from the screen, now shared thousands of times. The essay had gone viral. Comment sections overflowed with empathy and anger. Strangers wrote about their own hollow marriages, their invisible pain. Some called her brave. Others called her selfish. But the majority, the loudest voices, condemned the nameless husband she had described as a man whose touch felt like frost. The world had decided who he was. Daniel Carter, the cold-hearted husband. Olivia's hands trembled as she scrolled. The guilt came like a tide. She hadn't used his name, but everyone knew. In Seattle's social circles, There was only one couple that fit the image she'd painted. Within hours, journalists were speculating. Lifestyle blogs hinted at secrets behind Seattle's golden pair. Even tabloids picked up the scent. By evening, Daniel called. His voice was flat, controlled. "Did you write it?" Her breath caught. "What?" "The article. I'm trapped in a beautiful marriage. Don't lie to me, Olivia." She hesitated, but lying seemed pointless. "Yes," she whispered. There was silence, long, sharp, and suffocating. When he finally spoke, his words were colder than she'd ever heard them. "You just humiliated me in front of the entire city." "I didn't name you," she said quickly. "I didn't mean you didn't have to. Everyone knows who we are." His voice broke slightly on the last word, then steadied again. "Why would you do that?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because you wouldn't listen to me. Because I'm living with a ghost, Daniel. You come home and don't even look at me. You make me feel invisible." He exhaled, the sound brittle. "You could have talked to me, privately." "I tried," she said, her voice shaking, "for months." Another pause. Then, "You'll understand one day," he said quietly. "I hope that day isn't too late." And he hung up. The words echoed in her mind. "You'll understand one day." She didn't know what he meant, and it terrified her. By nightfall, their world was unraveling. The board of his company issued statements defending his integrity. PR teams scrambled to control the narrative. Meanwhile, Olivia sat alone on the couch, the city lights flickering through the rain. Her phone buzzed endlessly, reporters asking for interviews, strangers offering sympathy, hate messages from people accusing her of betrayal. Claire called again, voice trembling. "Liv, you've started a storm. Are you okay?" Olivia wanted to say yes, but the truth was she felt like she was disappearing. The thing she had created, those words, that story had taken on a life of its own. People didn't care about her pain anymore. They cared about the spectacle. At midnight, Daniel came home. His suit was wet from the rain, his face pale, eyes distant. For a long time, they just stared at each other across the room. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly. He gave a hollow laugh. "You just wanted to feel heard, right? Well, congratulations. The whole world's listening now." She stepped forward. "Daniel," he raised a hand, "don't. Not tonight." He walked past her into the study and shut the door. The sound of it closing echoed through the apartment like the end of something irreversible. Olivia stood there, tears streaming down her face, realizing she had finally broken the silence, but in doing so, she might have shattered the last fragile piece of what they once were. Outside, the rain kept falling. The city lights blurred through the glass, distorted like the life she no longer recognized. Somewhere in the noise of online applause and condemnation, her truth had been twisted into a weapon. And though she had written the article to be free, she had never felt more trapped. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It seemed as though the entire city of Seattle was holding its breath, suspended beneath a sky that refused to let go. Olivia hadn't seen Daniel since their brief, icy phone call. He had disappeared into his world of meetings and boardrooms, leaving her to face the storm she had created. The apartment, once filled with polite silence, now carried an unspoken tension so thick she could almost feel it pressing against her skin. That evening, she heard the familiar sound of his key turning in the lock. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she wanted to run to hide from the inevitable confrontation. But something inside her, perhaps pride or the ghost of the woman she used to be, kept her still. She stood in the living room, barefoot, wearing one of his old shirts, her hair tied loosely back. Daniel stepped inside, soaked from the rain. His suit clung to his frame, his expression unreadable. He closed the door quietly, hung his coat, and finally met her eyes. There was no anger in his face, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. "So," he said after a long pause, his voice calm, too calm, "I suppose this is what the truth looks like to you." Olivia's hands trembled slightly, but she forced her voice to steady. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just needed to be honest. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine." He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Honest," he repeated, as though testing the word. "You could have been honest with me. Instead, you were honest with the entire world." She took a step closer. "Would you have listened? Every time I tried, you shut me out. You came home late. You avoided me. You made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage." His eyes flickered, but his tone didn't change. "So you wrote it down. You made me the villain so people could love you again." "That's not fair," she said, her voice breaking. "I never used your name. I didn't want to destroy you, Daniel. I just wanted you to see what this was doing to me, to us." He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but it was devoid of humor. "You think I don't see?" He walked past her, into the kitchen, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. He poured himself a glass of water, the normalcy of the action infuriating her. "You think you're the only one suffering in this marriage?" "Then say it," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Say what's going on. Tell me why you've been so distant, why you won't even touch me. Tell me the truth, Daniel, please." He set the glass down slowly, the sound sharp in the silence. When he looked at her again, his expression softened, and for a fleeting second, she thought he might finally open up. But then, he said it quietly, almost tenderly. "You'll understand one day." The words landed like a slap. "That's it?" she said, staring at him in disbelief. "That's all you have to say to me?" He didn't answer. Her chest burned with rage and heartbreak. "You don't even deny it anymore, do you? The late nights, the phone calls, the lies. I wrote that article because I thought you were cheating on me, Daniel, because you left me to live with your silence, and silence is the cruelest kind of betrayal." He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking suddenly older, as if something deep inside him had already surrendered. "If that's what you need to believe," he murmured, "then believe it." His calmness, that unbearable, unshakable calm, drove her past the edge. She wanted him to shout, to fight back, to show her something human, anything that would prove he still cared. Instead, he stood there, silent, steady, watching her fall apart. "God, you're impossible," she shouted. "You hide behind your silence, behind your damn composure, and you expect me to just accept it? I can't do this anymore." Her voice cracked on the last word. For a moment, all that could be heard was the rain drumming against the glass. Daniel looked at her, his eyes heavy with something she couldn't name, sorrow, maybe, or guilt. "Then don't," he said softly. The simplicity of it stunned her. It wasn't anger or cruelty, just resignation, as though he had already accepted the ending she was still trying to deny. She turned away, tears blurring her vision. The room seemed to tilt, every memory of them clinging to the walls like ghosts' laughter echoing from another lifetime. The warmth of shared mornings, the soft hum of love that once filled this place. All of it gone. She walked to the bedroom, her movements mechanical. She packed without thinking a few clothes, her laptop, a stack of notes. Her wedding ring glinted under the lamplight as she hesitated, then slipped it off, placing it gently on the nightstand. The tiny metallic sound it made when it touched the wood broke her completely. When she returned to the living room, Daniel was standing by the window, staring out into the rain. He didn't turn when she spoke. "I'm leaving." He nodded slightly, as if he'd expected it. "Take care of yourself, Olivia." That calm, again, it was unbearable. "Do you even care?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I care more than you think," he said. "That's the problem." She frowned, not understanding, but he didn't elaborate. He just stood there, the reflection of the city lights shimmering across his face. For a moment, she thought he might turn, might stop her, might say something that would make her stay. But he didn't, so she walked out. The hallway outside smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and rain. The elevator ride felt endless. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of the apartment, their home growing smaller through the narrow gap. When the doors finally sealed shut, it felt like a chapter of her life collapsing quietly behind her. Outside, the night was cold, the streets slick with water. She pulled her coat tight around her and started walking with no real destination. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, and she realized she was crying, though she couldn't tell when the tears had started. She wandered past cafes filled with laughter, couples holding hands under umbrellas, the living proof that love still existed somewhere, just not here, not for her. The ache in her chest deepened, a hollow grief for something that wasn't quite dead, but no longer alive either. By the time she reached the small apartment she had rented months ago, a place she'd kept just in case, though she never admitted why she felt emptied of everything. She sat on the floor, surrounded by her bags, the city's distant hum filling the silence. Her phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. She opened it. It was from Daniel. Just 3 words. "Take care, Liv." Her breath hitched. The simplicity of it, the finality, hurt more than any fight could have. As she stared at the screen, the realization settled like dust around her. She had wanted him to break to rage, to confess, to fight for her. But instead, he let her go. And somehow, that hurt most of all. The first week away from Daniel passed in a blur of exhaustion and silence. Olivia spent most of her time in the small apartment she had rented, a modest space overlooking a rainy Seattle street. It was a world away from the sleek glass and marble of their penthouse, but at least here, she could breathe. The air smelled faintly of old wood and coffee from the cafe below. It was imperfect, and that imperfection brought a strange kind of comfort. Every morning, she woke expecting to see Daniel's empty side of the bed beside her, his quiet routine unfolding in the kitchen. Instead, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain tapping against the window. The world felt quieter, without him too quiet. One evening, as she unpacked the last of her boxes, Olivia opened the worn leather briefcase Daniel had once given her for her birthday. It was filled with old papers and unfinished articles, things she had meant to organize months ago. She emptied it onto the floor, papers scattering across the carpet like fallen leaves. A brown envelope slipped out, unmarked, sealed with a faint smudge of coffee on one corner. She frowned. It wasn't hers. Daniel's neat handwriting was on the flap, his name, followed by a hospital logo in small printed letters. Her breath caught. For a moment, she just stared at it, her pulse quickening. She knew she shouldn't open it. It wasn't her place anymore. But curiosity, no, fear pressed harder than reason. Her hands shook as she tore the envelope open. Inside were medical documents, scans, and test results, neatly clipped together. At first, the words blurred before her eyes, technical, clinical terms she couldn't immediately process. Then, slowly, horrifyingly, they began to make sense. Diagnosis: Stage 4. Pancreatic cancer. Date of diagnosis: 14 months ago. Treatment plan: palliative care, chemotherapy deferred due to complications. The room tilted. She couldn't breathe. Her hands clutched the papers as though she could stop the meaning from seeping into her bones. She read and reread every page, searching for any sign that she was wrong. that this was someone else's file. But it wasn't. His name was everywhere: Daniel Carter, his date of birth, his signature. Her knees gave out, and she sank onto the floor, the papers trembling in her grip. Her mind spun through every memory of the past year, the nights he came home late, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his hands sometimes trembled when he thought she wasn't looking, his distance, his silence, his refusal to fight. It all made sense now. "Oh, God," she whispered, tears spilling down her face. "Oh, Daniel." All this time, she had thought he didn't love her anymore, that he was hiding an affair or simply tired of her. But he had been hiding something far worse: the slow, quiet decay of his own life. He hadn't been pulling away because he stopped caring. He'd been trying to protect her from the inevitable. She pressed the papers to her chest and sobbed, her body shaking with grief and guilt. The rain outside beat harder against the window, as though the sky itself mourned with her. Memories came rushing back like fragments of a dream, his hand lingering on hers during breakfast. The way he sometimes stared at her, as though memorizing her face. The softness in his voice when he said, "You'll understand one day." Now she did. She spent hours on the floor, surrounded by the cold, white pages of his truth. When she finally found the strength to move, she noticed a small folded letter at the bottom of the envelope, one she hadn't seen before. It was addressed simply, "For Olivia." Her heart stopped. She unfolded it carefully, her tears already blurring the ink. His handwriting, steady but faint, filled the page. "Liv, if you're reading this, it means you found what I couldn't tell you myself. I tried, so many times. But every time I looked at you, I saw the life you still had to live, and I couldn't bear to darken it with what's left of mine. I didn't want you to stay out of pity. I didn't want your love to turn into obligation. You've always been fire and truth. Olivia and I wanted you to keep that, even if it meant hating me. You once asked me why I was distant. The truth is, I wasn't running from you. I was running out of time. Please don't let this destroy you. You gave me more love than I ever deserved. You were my home, even when I pretended not to need one. Daniel." By the time she reached the end, her tears had soaked through the paper. She pressed the letter to her lips, her heart splitting open. Every cruel word she had said to him, every accusation, every moment she had doubted his love, they all came flooding back, crushing her beneath their weight. The night stretched endlessly. She sat by the window, Daniel's letter in her lap, watching the rain fall over the city they once called theirs. The skyline shimmered through the mist, and she wondered where he was at that moment, if he was still in their penthouse, alone, fighting the pain in silence as he always did. She thought about calling him, but what would she say? How could she face him after everything? She had exposed him to the world, accused him of being cold, when in truth, he had been dying. She had written her pain into an essay that went viral, while he quietly carried his own agony in secret. By dawn, she made up her mind. She couldn't stay here. She needed to see him, to say the words she should have said before everything broke apart. The city was still asleep when she stepped outside. The air was crisp, and her breath came out in white clouds as she walked toward the street where their penthouse stood. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the building, the doorman looked startled to see her. "Mrs. Carter?" "Oh, I mean, Ms. Carter," he corrected awkwardly. "Mr. Carter hasn't been feeling well. He just—" She didn't wait for him to finish. She ran to the elevator, her hands trembling as she pressed the button. The doors opened onto a familiar silence. The apartment looked untouched, but something in the air felt different, thinner, quieter, almost sacred. She called his name softly. "Daniel?" No answer. She moved through the rooms, her heart pounding. Then she saw him on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. his body thinner than she remembered, his breathing shallow but steady. A half-empty glass of water sat beside him. Her voice broke. "Daniel." His eyes fluttered open, and when he saw her, something like relief flickered across his face. "You found it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears streaming freely. "Why didn't you tell me?" He smiled faintly, the corners of his lips trembling. "Because I knew you'd stay, and I wanted you to live. She took his hand in both of hers, pressing it against her heart. "You're not alone," she whispered through her tears. "Not anymore." He closed his eyes, his fingers curling weakly around hers. "You'll understand one day," he murmured again, his words fading like the last note of a song. But she already did. The days after finding out the truth blurred into one another, thick with silence and remorse. Olivia had moved back into the apartment, though Daniel was rarely awake long enough to notice. The once bright penthouse felt muted now, its glass walls no longer symbols of success, but mirrors reflecting every secret that had been left unsaid. The sound of the city below the distant horns, the rain slapping against the windows, felt intrusive, too alive for the slow, dying rhythm of the life inside. Daniel spent most of his time on the couch near the window, a thin blanket drawn over his lap, a book resting on his knees, though he seldom read anymore. His skin had lost its warmth, his voice its weight. Olivia hovered nearby, torn between wanting to be near him and fearing her presence only reminded him of her betrayal. At night, when he slept, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and a stack of cream-colored stationery she had bought years ago but never used. The house creaked softly, and the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the spaces where words once lived. That's when she began to write. "Dear Daniel, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say what I never could when it mattered. I thought I hated you. I thought you'd stopped loving me. Every silence felt like rejection, every distance like proof that I'd become invisible to you. But now, I know the truth, and it's killing me in ways I can't describe. You were slipping away quietly, and I was too loud to hear you." She paused, her hand trembling as she wiped away tears. The words looked too small for what she felt. Still, she kept writing. Each night became a ritual. She'd sit in that same chair, the lamplight soft on her face, and pour her heart into letters she never planned to send. The pages piled up, dozens of them folded neatly and tied with a red ribbon she found in her old desk. Writing was the only way she could speak to him without breaking down. Sometimes she wrote about the early days when they were still in love with the idea of forever. "Do you remember our first apartment? The one with the leaky faucet and the tiny kitchen? You used to bring home cheap red wine and call it our vintage. We burned dinner more often than not, but we laughed until the neighbors knocked on the door. You told me once that happiness was never about perfection. It was about choosing the same person, even when the world made it hard. I thought I understood that. But somewhere along the way, I started keeping score instead of choosing you." Other nights, she confessed her guilt. "I wrote that article to hurt you, Daniel, to make you feel the pain I couldn't name. When people praised me for my courage, I felt powerful, but underneath it all, I was crumbling. Because every word I wrote about you being cold and distant was really about me, about how afraid I was of losing what we had. I wish I had written you a letter instead of publishing my heartbreak for the world to see." During the days, she cared for him quietly. She prepared his soup, organized his medications, changed the flowers in the vase beside his bed. Daniel rarely spoke of his illness. Sometimes she caught him watching her with a faint, almost wistful smile, as though he were memorizing her face again, just as he used to when he thought she didn't notice. One evening, while she read aloud from one of the old travel journals they'd kept together, Daniel reached for her hand. His touch was frail, his fingers thin as paper. "Liv," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Don't let this be your prison." She froze. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "Guilt. It's heavier than death. Promise me you'll forgive yourself. Promise me you'll live when I can't." Her throat tightened. "Don't talk like that." He squeezed her hand, the gesture weak but sure. "You always had words, Liv. Use them for something better this time. Tell the truth, but not the kind that destroys." When he fell asleep that night, she sat beside him and opened her notebook again. "I think I finally understand what you meant when you said love changes. It doesn't disappear. It just becomes quieter, like a song that still plays after the dance ends. I kept waiting for the music to stop, not realizing it had only softened. I let fear drown out everything else. I was afraid of being unchosen, afraid of being forgotten. But you never stopped choosing me, even as you were dying." Her words spilled faster now, the ink smudging beneath her tears. Each sentence became both confession and prayer. There was one letter she couldn't write not yet, the one that began with goodbye. She kept that paper folded and blank, waiting for the day she'd find the strength to fill it. Days turned into weeks. Daniel's health declined, and the apartment grew quieter still. The world outside kept moving emails, phone calls, notifications, but Olivia ignored them all. Her world had shrunk to the sound of his breathing and the rustle of paper beneath her pen. Sometimes she would read the letters aloud to him when he was too weak to speak. She didn't know if he truly heard her, but his expression softened when her voice trembled on the word love. One afternoon, as the rain swept across the windows, she sat beside him and began another letter. "You once said that truth is never cruel, only the timing of it is. Maybe you were right. Maybe if I had known about your illness sooner, I would have begged you to fight. Maybe I would have written different words. But then again, maybe you wanted me to find out. This way to see how blind love becomes when it forgets to listen." She paused, listening to the rhythm of his shallow breaths. Then she leaned closer and whispered, "I'm listening now, Daniel. I promise." He stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering open. "You're still writing?" he murmured, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Until I have nothing left to say." "Then keep writing," he whispered. "It's who you are." That night, after he drifted into sleep again, Olivia wrote until the dawn light crept across the horizon. The final lines came softly, almost like a lullaby. When I look back now, I don't see a nightmare. I see two people who are afraid of time, of loss, of saying the wrong thing. But even in our silence, there was love. You carried it in your sickness. I buried it in my anger. Maybe that's what marriage really is, not perfection, but the quiet attempt to understand what love demands of us. She folded the letter carefully, tied it with the others, and placed the bundle on the nightstand beside him. Then she sat there in the half-light, listening to his breathing, knowing that someday soon, those letters would be all that remained pages of love and regret, written too late, but from a heart that had finally learned how to speak. The morning Daniel died, the sky over Seattle was washed in a pale, colorless gray, the kind of light that blurred the edges of everything, as if the world itself was unsure where one thing ended and another began. Olivia had fallen asleep in a chair beside his bed, her head resting on the armrest, her hand still wrapped around his. When she awoke, the apartment was unbearably still. At first, she thought he was sleeping. His face looked calm, almost boyish, in the soft morning light. But something in the air felt different. The faint hum of life that usually surrounded him had vanished. She called his name softly, then louder, her voice cracking through the silence. "Daniel?" No answer, only the whisper of rain against the window, steady and cruel in its indifference. Her chest tightened as she reached for his wrist, pressing her fingers to his pulse point. Nothing, just the cold stillness of skin. The world tilted, and the sound that came out of her was small and broken. The sound of someone realizing they are suddenly, devastatingly alone. She held him for what felt like hours, her tears falling onto the blanket that covered his chest. There were so many things she still wanted to say, apologies, promises, the words she'd written but never had the courage to read aloud. She whispered them anyway, into the hollow quiet, hoping that somehow he could still hear her. When the paramedics came, she couldn't bring herself to move. They were kind but distant, the way people are when they have seen too much death. She sat on the floor, her arms wrapped around herself as they took him away. The sound of the stretcher wheels on the tile echoed like the closing of a door that would never open again. After they left, the apartment felt haunted. His cup still sat on the table, half full of water. His sweater hung on the back of the chair. The scent of him, cedarwood and soap, lingered in the air. She wandered from room to room, tracing the spaces he once occupied. The couch where he used to read, the window where he'd watch the rain, the bed they no longer shared. Every inch of that home was him, and now it was unbearable. The funeral came 3 days later. It was small, private, exactly as he would have wanted. The rain hadn't stopped, and the cemetery ground was soft beneath the heels of her shoes. People she barely knew offered their condolences, colleagues, old friends, distant relatives, but their words slid past her like static. Olivia stood near the casket, her black coat heavy with rain, her fingers clutching the folded letters she'd written to him. She wanted to place them inside, to let him take her words with him, but something in her resisted. It felt too final, too real. When the pastor spoke, she barely heard the words. They were kind, gentle, but impersonal about faith, peace, eternal rest. She wanted to scream that this wasn't peace, it was punishment. That forgiveness didn't come easy when you were left behind with all the wrong words. After the burial, as the guests drifted away, a man approached her. He was tall, gray-haired, dressed in a dark overcoat. His voice was low, steady, formal. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, "I'm Robert Hayes Daniel's lawyer." She blinked, trying to remember if Daniel had ever mentioned him. He handed her a small brown envelope, worn at the edges, with her name written across it in Daniel's familiar handwriting. "He left this for you," Robert said. "He asked that I deliver it personally after his passing." Her fingers trembled as she took it. "What is it?" The lawyer hesitated. "A recording. He said you'd understand." When she returned home that evening, the apartment felt emptier than ever. She placed the envelope on the table and stared at it for a long time. The sound of the rain outside was relentless, like the ticking of a clock she could no longer ignore. Finally, she opened it. Inside was a small USB drive, wrapped in a piece of paper. On the paper, Daniel had written only 3 words: "Play it, Liv." Her heart pounded as she plugged it into her laptop. A moment of silence, then the soft crackle of static, and then his voice. "Hey, Liv," Daniel said, his tone warm, tired, intimate. "If you're hearing this, I guess I didn't get the chance to say goodbye the way I wanted." Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears blurred her vision instantly. "I thought about writing you a letter," he continued, "but I knew words on paper would never hold enough of me, so I wanted you to hear my voice, one last time. You always said I never talked enough, so I suppose This is me trying to make up for it." He paused, and she could hear his breath catch slightly, a faint rasp beneath the surface. "I know you're angry. I know you think I shut you out. But the truth is, I was terrified. Not of dying, though, that scared me too, but of watching you suffer because of me. You deserved light, laughter, stories, not hospitals and waiting rooms. I didn't tell you because I loved you too much to let you spend your days watching me fade." Olivia pressed her forehead against the table, sobbing quietly. Daniel's voice softened. "I read your article, Liv. Every word. It hurt, yes, but I also understood. You wrote it because you were lonely, and I made you that way. I want you to know, I forgave you long before you asked. You were angry because you cared, and if I could go back, I'd tell you every day that I loved you. Even in silence, I loved you." He coughed a dry, shaky sound and then laughed softly. "You always hated that I laughed at the wrong moments." She smiled through her tears, her chest aching. "Don't let this destroy you," he said after a long pause. "Promise me you'll live, write again, love again. Don't turn me into your ghost. I don't want to be the reason you stop believing in happiness." There was a faint sound of movement. Perhaps he'd shifted in his chair. Then, almost in a whisper, "You were my home, Liv. Even when I pushed you away. You were my beginning and my end. Thank you for loving me, even when it hurt." A beat of silence. Then his final words, gentle and certain. "Goodbye, my love." The recording ended. Olivia sat there for a long time, her face buried in her hands, the echo of his voice still filling the room. She played it again and again until every word was etched into her memory. The ache inside her shifted still sharp, but softer, threaded with something like peace. Later that night, she stood by the window where he had once watched the rain. The city lights shimmered through the mist, and for the first time, she didn't feel like the world had ended. It had simply changed shape. She opened the window and let the cool air rush in, carrying the faint scent of rain and asphalt. Then, quietly, she whispered into the night, "Goodbye, Daniel, and thank you." The words disappeared into the darkness, carried away by the wind, yet somehow she knew he heard them. Spring came to Seattle slowly, as if the city itself was relearning how to breathe after a long, relentless winter. The rain softened into mist, the trees lining the streets flushed green again, and the air carried that faint sweetness that follows grief, not joy exactly, but survival. Olivia Carter woke each morning to a different kind of quiet now. Not the suffocating silence of loss, but a gentle one, the kind that makes room for memory without breaking you. It had been 6 months since Daniel's death. 6 months since she'd listened to his final recording, until every word carved itself into her bones. She still kept the USB drive on her nightstand, but she no longer played it every night. Some nights, she simply sat beside it and whispered things she wished he could hear. How the morning light looked, how the coffee tasted, how the world had changed since he left. Her grief had stopped being a storm. It had become a tide, something that ebbed and flowed quietly, returning when she least expected. In those months, Olivia did what Daniel had asked her to do. She began to write again. At first, the words came hesitantly. She wrote at the small cafe below her apartment, the one that smelled of cinnamon and rain, the same place she had hidden from the world when everything fell apart. She would sit near the window, laptop open, fingers trembling over the keyboard. For hours, she'd stare at the blank screen, waiting for courage to return. Then, one morning, without warning, it did. The first sentence appeared like a confession she'd been holding in for years. "I once called my marriage a nightmare, until I realized I had misunderstood the dream." From there, the rest followed, slowly, painfully, truthfully. She wrote about Daniel not as the perfect husband the world thought he was, nor as the cold, distant man she had once believed him to be, but as something in between. A flawed, frightened, loving soul who had carried his own battles in silence. She wrote about herself, too, about her anger, her loneliness, the pride that had kept her from reaching out. Every word was an unraveling, a confession, a small act of forgiveness. She titled the manuscript "The Nightmare I Misunderstood." The book wasn't a memoir, not exactly. It was part love story, part apology, part elegy. She didn't write it to justify herself or to immortalize him. She wrote it to understand. To piece together the truth they both failed to say when they had the chance. Months later, when she sent it to her editor, she didn't expect a response. But within a week, there was one. "It's raw, devastating, and human," the editor wrote. "It's not about death. It's about learning to live again." By the time the book was published, the city was wrapped in early summer light. Olivia stood in the middle of the bookstore on launch day, surrounded by rows of copies, the cover simple. A pale gray background with a faint trace of rain running down a window pane. She ran her fingers across the title, her heart heavy and proud all at once. People came, not many, but enough. Some recognized her from her old journalism days. Others had simply read the book's description and been drawn to it. When she began to speak, her voice trembled, but only for a moment. "I used to think love was about staying," she told them, "about holding on no matter what. But sometimes love is about understanding even if it happens too late. This book isn't just about loss. It's about what we do after, about how we keep loving someone who's gone." The audience listened quietly. Some cried. A woman in the front row, perhaps in her 50s, clutched the book to her chest and whispered, "Thank you," as Olivia signed her copy. That night, after the event ended, she walked alone through the city. The streets were slick with rain, the reflections of streetlights rippling in the puddles. She passed the glass high-rises where she and Daniel had once lived, and for a moment she imagined him beside her, not sick, not fading, but as he had been in their best days, laughing softly, his hand warm in hers. When she reached the waterfront, she stopped. The air smelled of salt and rain. She sat on a bench overlooking the black water and pulled a letter from her coat pocket, one she'd written the night before. "Dear Daniel, the book is done. They say it's beautiful, but all I know is that it's honest. Every word is a piece of us, the good, the terrible, the tender. Sometimes I still wish for more time. But then I remember that you gave me something better, the truth. I thought our story ended with your death, but I see now that it didn't. It's still alive in me, in these pages, in every person who reads them and feels a little less alone. You told me once that guilt is heavier than death. You were right, but love, Daniel love, outlasts them both." She folded the letter and placed it into the wind, letting it drift out of her hands. The rain caught it almost immediately, turning the paper translucent before carrying it into the dark. For the first time, she didn't feel the ache of letting go. She felt the quiet grace of release. In the following weeks, "The Nightmare I Misunderstood" began to spread beyond Seattle. Readers wrote to her, strangers from across the country, sharing their own stories of loss, of forgiveness, of love misunderstood. Some said her words helped them reach out to the people they had hurt. Others said the book gave them peace. Olivia read every message. Sometimes she wept. Other times, she smiled through her tears, hearing Daniel's voice in her head, whispering that she was doing what she was meant to do. She started visiting schools and writing workshops, speaking about truth and empathy, about how silence can ruin more than words ever could. Each time she spoke, she imagined Daniel somewhere in the audience, proud, amused, maybe a little embarrassed by all the attention. One evening, months later, she returned to the cafe where it had all begun, the same table by the window, the same rain-streaked view of the street. She ordered her usual black coffee and opened her notebook. For the first time, she wasn't writing about Daniel. She was writing about herself, her new life, her quiet mornings, her slow rediscovery of joy. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow on the wet pavement. She looked up, smiling faintly. "See, Daniel," she whispered, "you were right. I'm still here." And in that moment, the world didn't feel empty anymore. It felt whole again, scarred, yes, but beautiful in its imperfection. Love, she realized, was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be understood, even if it takes a lifetime to do so.